What is the most powerful argument for the existence of God? The most powerful argument for the existence of God. Now, when I say argument, I don't mean this. I don't mean quarreling. I don't mean fighting with words. I mean having a point of view and giving reasons for that point of view. So one of the illustrations I like with that is if you were to picture a house, right? And the roof represents the statement or the point of view. This is my position on any given topic. And the reasons are the walls here. So with a house, I mean, what supports keeping the roof up? Obviously, it's the walls, right? And that's the same thing when it comes with an argument. What supports the point of view is you've got to have good reasons. And depending on what the point of view is, it might, the load, which is the words here, might be pretty heavy, and so these got to be pretty strong reasons. Sometimes people will have a point of view and no reasons, right? And so at that point, it's just an opinion, which is fine. We can all have some opinions, but sometimes they're heavily like, this is the truth. Remember we talked about last week, well, why? How did you come to that conclusion? Just asking that question alone, especially around God, can really make somebody think. So why do you believe that? So we've got to have reasons. Now, in logic, there's a formal way we do this. And you've got premises, and then you've got a conclusion. And even though we don't talk like this, this is what's going on behind the scenes when we have a certain point of view and we've got some reasons behind it. But I give you this because I'm going to give you an argument, a simple one. I'm going to give you an argument shortly. So, all right. So let's go back to our question. What is the most powerful argument for the existence of God? What I want to cover with you today is what the cosmological argument. Now, as we see, Christians have different opinions on what the powerful arguments are, and even apologists have differing opinions. For me, the cosmological argument, I think, is one of the most powerful, specifically the Kalam version. There's a few versions. Now, this is a mouthful. Don't think that anybody has to remember this. The headline with this is, God is the best explanation for the beginning of the universe. God is the best explanation for the beginning of the universe. That's what this version is. So what I want to do is just walk through this from a simple perspective, because I think, and this is one I've used to just to share with people. So I want to have a little bit of fun with this and use an approach that Jesus used. Right now, Jesus claimed to be God and proved he is God, and we'll get to that in a future class. But Jesus was also an amazing teacher. Right? And one of the things that Jesus did is he used illustrations that people of his day could understand and remember, right? Such as farming, right? What are the different responses and how people respond to the Word of God? He used farming, right? Remember the parable of the sower. And so he was explaining these responses, but he used something they could understand. So what I decided to do is use a topic that I love, and is popular in this day and age, and that is the game of football. So I'm going to use that as an illustration for our topic today. And a question for you, and if you know the answer, just yell it out. How does a football game begin? Kickoff. You say yes? Kickoff. You got it. That's right. Kickoff. I'm a diehard Patriots fan of 40 years, so I'm going to use a few Patriot pictures here. Some people said the coin toss, but the actual game begins with the kickoff, right? And what do we got? We got about 3 hours to go. Okay. How does this relate to the topic of this beginning of the universe? Well, just simply put, just as the beginning of the football game had a cause, so also the beginning of the universe had a cause. This is simple, but this is a powerful illustration of cause and effect. Now, we're going to come back to this illustration, but let me give you the actual argument. This is the cosmological argument. There's a couple different ways it's said, but essentially it goes like this. everything that had a beginning had a cause. The universe had a beginning, therefore, and you can almost get it in your mind, the universe had a cause. And it follows that if premise 1 is true and premise 2 is true, then by logic, premise 3 has to be true. Now, the big question is, why is God the best explanation for the cause? And we'll get to that. But it's a very simple piece here, and it's very powerful. So let's start with, I don't want to go right to 3. I want to start with each of the premises here. So let's start with number 1. Everything that had a beginning had a cause. Why should we believe that that is true? I mean, this is simply the principle of causality, right? Cause and effect. If you went out to your car and you saw a giant dent here, yeah, oh no, would you assume it just happened? Or that something caused it? Something caused it, right? Somebody backed into it. For me, somebody found out I was a Patriots fan and the Jets fan took a sledgehammer, whatever. It didn't just happen. Something caused this, right? This is foundational to our, this is intuitive, right? It's also foundational to science, right? Science is the search to understand causes that are happening in the universe. And now we know that rain just doesn't happen here. We know that there's evaporation, there's condensation, that leads to precipitation. So science is a search to understand the universe and causes that are happening. So let's go back to our football illustration and the kickoff. The game doesn't begin until there's an actual cause. Let's see. Did you see the kickoff? The kicker? Let's go back to it. Here we go. So the game doesn't begin until boom. So the kicker causes the game to begin. And he actually runs it back for a touchdown, but we don't have time for that. So, all right, here's another one. Doesn't start until boom. All right, that's another one. Runs it back for a touchdown. You know, those are, when you're searching for kickoffs, they only put the ones on YouTube where there's a return for a touchdown. But this one's interesting, right? Because the game is starting. You can see it's first quarter, 15 minutes, but you don't see the kicker. The ball is in the air, and I have no idea. But the ball is in the air somewhere. So did this one have an effect without a cause, even though we didn't see it? No. So we just didn't see it, but somebody must have kicked the ball, right? There must be a cause with that effect. Even though we didn't see it there, somebody did kick the ball. All right. This one I think is pretty obvious, right? Everything that has a beginning has a cause. So let's go to number 2. The universe had a beginning. Now there's only 2 options here, right? It either had a beginning or it didn't have a beginning. And Christians maintain that God created the heavens and the earth, right? And not only do we have the Word of God, but there were philosophical arguments to help prove this point. Now, what did atheists believe before the 20th century? Many of them, most of them, maintained that the universe was eternal. But then you had the 20th century with all this scientific evidence coming out, and where was it? All on this side. So virtually everyone recognizes now that the universe had a beginning. Now, I'm not going to go through all the science, but I do want to give you one philosophical argument that might make your head hurt, but we'll try and keep it a little, it made my head hurt the first time I heard it, but then we'll give something on science as well. So let's do the philosophical argument here. There's a couple. This one I like. It is not possible for an infinite number of successive events to have occurred. You cannot complete an infinite set because you can always add one more. And so philosophers look at this and say, well, the past could not be infinite because I couldn't arrive at today. Okay, this is where I think an illustration is helpful. Let's say you're at a train station and you're waiting for the train to arrive. Train's coming. But it has to make an infinite number of stops before it gets to you. will it ever get to today? No. It will never complete an infinite number of stops. And so philosophers argued and said, well, if you cannot complete an infinite, you can't complete an infinite going forward, you can't complete an infinite going backwards. The universe can't be infinitely old, because how could I have arrived at today? So that was one of the ways they would argue as support for Scripture. Now, we've also got some science now that further really makes the case. The prevailing theory is the Big Bang, that the universe exploded into existence. Again, some will say 13.6, 13.7 billion years ago. And some Christians go with this, some Christians have a hard time with this. At the end of the day, if this is true, it really actually fits with Christianity, because the Big Bang needs a banger. Someone launched it into existence, right? But if the Big Bang is not true, no problem, because there's a different scientific argument that I want to go over with you. But there is some evidence for the Big Bang. One of them is the universe is expanding, right? So scientists have extrapolated it back to a point where the distances go to a point of zero where there's nothingness. And then there's some other evidence for the Big Bang. The scientific evidence that I like for the universe not being infinite is the second law of thermodynamics. Now, among this basically says that all processes are tending towards disorder. That is fundamental to this law in science. All processes are tending towards disorder. The universe is winding down. In a closed system, energy is spreading out and eventually will become unusable. But since the Earth is still spinning, the sun is still giving off energy, things are still operating, we have not experienced this, what they would call heat death, or this spreading out of all energy. Since it's still active, there's still usable energy, the universe cannot be infinite. This is rock solid. Again, virtually all scientists grant that the universe had a beginning. So here we've got it running out of usable energy. All right. So again, we can talk more about each of these, but I think these are not as controversial. What comes down to then is, therefore the universe had a cause. And even somebody like Anthony Flew recognized this to be the case. Does anybody know who Anthony Flew is? Okay, so this is Anthony Flew. He's one of the most famous atheists of the 20th century. Wrote books against Christians, debated Christians, just an ardent atheist, but really had a meek and humble heart. And towards the end of his life came to believe there is a God. There is a God. With all this evidence that was coming out, some of it was the design argument, some of it was the beginning of the universe. He just said, I've got to follow the evidence. He actually wrote this book. I have it. It's a good book. It's called There Is a God, the Noah's crossed out. How the world's most notorious atheist changed his mind. And in that, he shares his evidence for why he thinks God exists. Now, as it pertains to this argument, he had this quote that I thought was interesting. If the universe had a beginning, it became entirely sensible, almost inevitable to ask, what produced this beginning? And therein is the question here, right? Now, Christians will say that God is the best explanation. Some atheists will say, well, that is a God of the gaps fallacy. You don't know that. You're simply inserting God in here. And what I would respond with that, and Christians respond, is we're not claiming that based on what we don't know, but what we do know. This is not a God of the gaps fallacy. This is the best explanation for what we do know. So let me walk you through that. The cause of the universe. So think about the universe for a second. What are the core elements of the universe? Space, time, and matter, right? You've got to have space. You've got to have a three-dimensional space. You've got to have time that separates events, and stuff, matter, right? Now, for our football example, we know who did the kickoff here. We saw them do it. We didn't see who started the universe. But again, we're going to lean on these attributes. So the cause, whatever brought space into existence, must be spaceless. Whatever brought time into existence must be timeless. Whatever brought matter in existence must be material. Again, think about it. If the universe is time and space and matter, and it didn't exist, and then it was brought into existence, the cause doesn't have these attributes. The cause is spaceless and timeless and immaterial. Now think about these three things. This is the core of nature, right? This is our world. This is what the universe is, what the world is made up of. So whatever brought these things into existence is supernatural. I think you can definitely make that case. There was a time when these things did not exist. Something caused them to come into existence. It must be supernatural. And by the way, it's a supernatural event to bring nature into existence. So with that said, that's already a big step, I think, towards God. The next one you can probably say is that the cause must be powerful. To go from a point of nothingness to the universe, that's creation ex nihilo. That is a big deal. The cause must be powerful. And lastly, and this one is a big one, right? The cause must be personal. Now, if we've got these here and we add personal, wow, that sounds a lot like a divine being or God. The question is how can we make this case that the cause is personal? Let me give you two different ways that this can be said. The first one is maybe a little trickier, but this is the one that William Lane Craig uses in debates. He basically says, if we've established this, that the cause is spaceless and timeless and immaterial, what are the things that fall under that umbrella? Well, one thing is you've got stuff like abstract concepts, like numbers. Numbers is not material, and it's not bound by time. So you got abstract concepts, and the other one would be a mind, an unembodied mind, not tied to a material body. Again, atheists might not believe it, but I think that's a potential concept. We believe that, right? We believe we have a body, we have a soul, we have a mind. So we either have an abstract concept or an unembodied mind. But abstract concepts like numbers, they don't cause things. They don't create things. A mind could cause something. So that's one of the ways they argue this, is the only thing that's left really is an unembodied mind that made a decision to create the universe. That's one way. I think it's a little bit harder. The second way I think you can argue personal is this. There's two types of causes. There are agent causes and there are event causes. An agent cause is something that, a being that makes a decision with free will to do something, like this. This is a wall of a building, and it's been painted, and you're just looking at it, you can tell that a person must have, something of intelligence. This didn't happen by chance, right? And so this would be an example of agent causation. A person chose to do this. The other type of causation can be event-to-event causation. Now here's a wall, and there's cracks in it. Now maybe a person did this. Maybe, the Patriots lost last week and somebody drove a bulldozer into the wall. They chose to do it. But let's just say we know for a fact that an earthquake did this. An earthquake is an event, right? So that event of the earthquake shook the ground and caused these cracks. Well, okay, so that makes sense. There's an event and there's an event, but with event causation, there must always be some subsequent or prior event that causes these things. So what caused the earthquake? Well, movement in plate tectonics. And what causes that? And you could keep going back and back and back. With event causation, you can have different events causing different things under the umbrella of the laws of nature. So you can have agents causing things, or you can have events, things in nature causing things. Now, let's think about the universe. Whatever caused the universe there was a state of spaceless, timeless state of affairs, like equilibrium, like there's nothing going on. So what caused all of this to get started? Would it just kind of start on its own with some event? It's hard to picture that happening because there's nothing, everything's at a state of equilibrium, whatever's there. It's much easier to think about an agent starting this, what they would call the first cause or the first mover, getting this going. So that's how philosophers would argue that the best explanation for the cause is personal. That somebody that had to make a decision to go from the infinite something to creating a finite universe. Now, I'll tell you, that's tough to kind of just, it took me a while to just kind of think through that and understand that. But God is the best explanation. All right, here's our argument. Everything at the beginning had a cause, the universe had a beginning, therefore the universe had a cause, and the best explanation based on the attributes we just talked about is God. Now, let me give you a couple of ways that I think skeptics confuse what we're saying. Okay? One of them is this. They take this first premise and watch what happens here. They cross this out. And they say, well, you're saying that everything needs a cause. So what caused God? Right? And is that our argument? No. So this is not the case at all. Of course, I had to put a Brady picture in here just to kind of, as a Patriots fan. But this, again, this is not our position. This is not our argument that everything needs a cause. It's that everything had a beginning needs a cause. God, by definition, didn't have a beginning. And I'm not just saying this. I found a couple of books. I like to buy not only Christian books, but I like to buy books from skeptics to kind of see what they're saying. Here's a book, 50 Reasons People Give for Believing in God. And here's what they said. But if believers are right and everything requires a cause, then that means something or someone must have caused their gods as well. They can't have it both ways. Is that our argument? No. They're saying believers are right and everything requires. We're not saying everything requires a cause, just everything that has a beginning. That's cause and effect. There's another one here, the Counter-Creationism Handbook says that if as some claim God does not need a cause, well, then the same reasoning neither does the universe. Which again, this doesn't make sense. I mean, the universe had a beginning. It needs an explanation. So, that's one. The other way they're trying to argue is they actually argue against this first premise that every effect has a cause, and trying to say that some things can pop into existence. You see this in quantum mechanics, and that's not the case at all. In a quantum vacuum, there's actually this fluctuating energy, and particles are coming into existence out of that energy. But they try and use that to say, well, see, particles can appear out of nothing, and that's, when we say nothing existed, it's literally no thing. It's not this sea of fluctuating energy, it's literally nothing. You can't get something out of that. Is that the God particle? Yeah, there's that. Lawrence Krauss is a famous atheist from Arizona State University. He's done debates, and he makes this point that, oh, well, we see particles in quantum physics come into existence out of nothing. But he is equivocating on what when he says nothing, he means a vacuum of fluctuating energy. When we say nothing, we mean literally nothing, no thing at all. So he's equivocating on that, so that's wrong. Now what I want to show you is this clip is very quick, and I'm not trying to poke fun at Richard Dawkins. If you know Richard Dawkins, he's a famous atheist. But you can see him struggle with this concept. So let's play this.
Do you believe that nothing created everything?
No, because nothing can perform actions. That makes no sense.
It's a default position. If you say nothing created everything, then you're agreeing with Richard Dawkins.
You're mischaracterizing Richard Dawkins because Richard Dawkins, I'm sure he didn't say that. That seems ridiculous.
Professor Richard Dawkins, arguably the world's most high-profile atheist, believes that in the beginning there was nothing and that nothing created everything. As he attempts to justify this belief, admitting that it defies common sense, the learned professor calls nothing something. Watch the reaction of his audience. Of course it's counterintuitive that you can get something from nothing. Of course common sense doesn't allow you to get something from nothing. That's why it's interesting. It's got to be interesting in order to give rise to the universe at all. Something pretty mysterious had to give rise to the origin of the universe. It's exactly what's meant by nothing, but whatever it is, it's very, very simple. And why is that funny?
Well, I think it's a bit funny to be trying to define nothing.
Richard Dawkins, I'm sure he didn't say that. That seems ridiculous.
The audience reaction confused the normally eloquent professor because he's not used to being the object of laughter. What he didn't realize was he was talking to people who were endowed by their creator with the virtue of common sense. This was just another case where the emperor has no clothes. Someone should tell this man who has deceived millions, you're talking foolishness.
I just like how he says, of course it's counterintuitive. Of course it's against common sense. That's why it's interesting. And I want to say, but if we're going to be rational, and what is at stake is eternity, shouldn't we follow where the evidence leads us? Now again, he is wedded to naturalism. He will not allow the supernatural to be a possibility. So he doesn't allow for God to be an option. But notice how he struggles with this. He's talking about nothing. It's got to be something simple. Wait a minute. If it's nothing, it's not something simple. It's literally nothing. So let me finish with this slide and put it in layman's terms. This is how I would say the argument in layman's terms. If something exists now, which obviously this does, we're here. If something exists now, something has always existed. I think that metaphysically just makes sense, right? But if the universe had a beginning, then something outside of our universe must have caused it. And Christians would say the best explanation is God. Genesis 1:1, in the beginning God created the heavens and the earth. I think this makes sense of both the philosophy, the science, everything that we know. This is the best explanation for the beginning of the universe.